Good morning. Question. How many of you see John walking across the front right now? I'm just kidding. Question. Extroverts love that. Yeah. Question for you. How many of you, be honest, how many of you are returning something that you got for Christmas? Yeah. Now, don't be embarrassed, because sometimes we return it because it's the wrong size, not just because it was ugly or weird. But sometimes we return gifts because, they don't fit, or maybe you're returning something because you already had that particular gift. And then, of course, there is the return because there's no way on God's green earth, whatever. This is the time of year when a lot of things get returned. After our service, we're going to return these trees to their boxes, and the lights and all the decor are going to go back. Maybe you've already started that process at your house. Maybe some of you take a little bit longer, and you'll get around to it in March. But this is a time when students start thinking about returning to school. You start thinking about returning to work. Just in general, we kind of begin considering what it's going to be like to return to the normalcy of life. And then there are more emotional returns. Sometimes we start thinking about, instead of our focus being on all the festivities of the holidays, now we start realizing that we're returning back to the loneliness that we were trying to mask over. Maybe we're returning to a job that we really don't want to return to. It's not the case for me. Just wanted to say that. Maybe you're going to have to return to some things and deal with some stuff with your family that you were able to kind of temporarily put on hold through the holidays. There is a real returning that we do. The song that we were singing there, which is really kind of an anthem for us as a church, "Come Alive, Dry Bones." We have these moments where we come alive, but then we find ourselves back in that dry bone stage again. And maybe you're asking yourself, why do I cycle through life like that? Why don't I stay alive when I come alive? And I think even especially in these holiday seasons, we hit these high points, and hopefully you have had maybe greater than any other time in your life. You had a meaningful encounter with the Christ child this year, and something just really it hit. It sunk in with you, but then you're realizing, I might be going back to some people that don't have the same perspective. And maybe they didn't have the same experience that I did. And this isn't something that we just experience at Christmas time. We experience it in smaller ways almost any week of the year. Maybe you really relish these times of worship on Sunday, but no sooner do you get out to the parking lot and you realize, I got to get back to the normal of what my family expects. And you wish you could just kind of push off Mondays for another couple of days and have maybe an extended Sunday experience. We go through these quite a bit. As a team, we're preparing for this Christmas Not Crazy series that we've been in for the last 5 weeks. We all spent some extra time reading the Christmas stories, Matthew 2 and Luke 2 in particular. And I really felt my heart gravitating towards the shepherds in particular, and just spent some extra time kind of chewing on those verses and trying to immerse myself in what it was like being a shepherd, and just that incredible encounter when they were out in the fields with the angels. And then it's such a cool story because the shepherds were the less thans and the outcasts of society, but they were given front row seats for Jesus' opening night. I mean, who doesn't love the story of an underdog that wins? And so here these guys get to experience this amazing moment. I can get chill bumps thinking about what this would have been like on that Christmas night in the presence of Christ. Talk about a holy experience. And so I'm reading this and I'm immersed in this, and I can't even put into words what I'm thinking I would be feeling and what those shepherds must have felt. And then I get to Luke 2:20. And the shepherds did what? They returned. I got to a point when I was reading that, and I had a visceral response to it. I was like, no, don't leave. Why would you leave from this encounter? It says they returned. In other words, they went back to the fields. They went back to the sheep, smelly sheep. They went back to the normalcy of life. They went back to their socially derided type of living that they were doing. They returned. And I just hung out on that word for a really long time. And it was frustrating to me. And I started thinking of all the things they could have said to linger, if not remain forever, in that beautiful moment with the Christ child. I was trying to think of things they could have said, Mary, do you need a nanny? Or in this case, a manny. And, can we get, man, okay. Of all of the things that you're going to leave, they left the presence of the Christ child. And that just really, I don't know, it kind of knotted up my stomach thinking about it. Because not only did they leave from that magnificent event, they returned to a very mundane, unthrilling existence. Crazy. Do you know what the definition of a holiday hangover is? You know what I'm talking about when I say holiday hangover? I'm not talking spiked eggnog, that kind of a hangover, okay? But it is, you could define it as that terrible feeling you get the day you have to go back to work after more than 2 days off due to a holiday. Maybe it's just after 30 minutes off for some of you, I don't know. But there is this holiday hangover. And so I'm wondering, did the shepherds have some kind of a holiday hangover? How did they avoid? As we continue reading through this verse, it says that they returned glorifying and praising God. So they didn't have the holiday hangover, at least in this encounter right here. How did they avoid that? This crashing after a great few days, if you've ever experienced something like that, I want you to know that you're not alone. And this is not, when it does happen, you should not necessarily think there's something wrong, that you've done something wrong. You shouldn't shame yourself into thinking, well, if I was a better person, I wouldn't crash after the holidays like this. Because the scriptures have other encounters of some incredible men and women who had these moments where they were in God's presence, but then shortly thereafter really encountered a difficult low. One of the persons that comes to mind is Elijah. Has this great encounter, and you can read about it in 1 Kings, where the outcome is he's victorious over the prophets of Baal, and then the next thing you read, he's in this depressed state, running for his life, full of fear, and he's questioning whether or not he ever should have been born. Great man of God, great encounter, really struggling. Jesus himself encountered a moment that I'm sure was a spiritual high point for him when he was baptized. He's baptized by John the Baptist, and he hears his Father's voice from heaven. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And then we read what happens right after that. He's ushered into the temptation place of the wilderness. So don't be surprised when we have these great moments followed by really challenging times. And I think it's good to remind ourselves that it's the normalcy of the day-to-day that Jesus came down to enter into. He left in heaven the perfect, euphoric, spiritual high, literally, and entered into the normal, the mundane, the challenging, the painful of today. So we have encounters with Jesus, and then we return to a broken and untransformed world. And I guess the first thing I want us to know is this is normal. It's not something that you did wrong when you go back and you realize, as great as maybe you've had for a few days over a Christmas break, or if you've had a great moment in the morning with your time with the Lord and Bible study and prayer, it's normal to go back and realize that everything around you is still broken. and you're going back into your field and caring for sheep that are smelly, that have some great needs. But we read that they returned, the shepherds did, they returned in Luke 2:20, glorifying and praising God. And perhaps the only thing stranger than leaving was the manner in which they returned, glorifying and praising God. To me, this says that they went back with their hearts full, and their lives were obviously transformed, which led me to wonder why their response is so much different than my typical post-spiritual high. What was it about them? And this is what I began to really wrestle with, because this has been a pattern in my life, and I don't know if you can relate to this. Maybe you're still yearning for that first moment where you can really sense and feel God's presence. Those that have journeyed with God for a while will tell you that that doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it is a really sweet encounter, even if it's like, what we read about in the New Testament where the disciples are with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. Their first response was, well, let's build houses and stay here. This is good. I don't want to leave this. But in this world, we do have trouble. In this world, we are called back to the same field and the same sheep. And so how is it that their response was so different than mine? I'm frustrated at the return to normal. Anybody with me on that? If Luke 2:20 were me, this is probably how it would read. And the shepherds returned, complaining about their job and kicking the sheep. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you just you're imagining what life, you remember what life was, and then you're just like, man, what, this is it? This is what I'm back to? But after pausing for genuine spiritual encounters, we are called to return as transformed people. And it's incremental, it's bit by bit, it's step by step, but we can become more fully the person that God has created each of us to become. We can become more fully the God-glorifying, praising shepherds that He has created us to be. And this transformation isn't once and for all. It doesn't mean that we're completely transformed. We read that this won't take place until the forever of heaven. But while we are here on earth, we are blessed with an opportunity to continue to experience these transformations. There are some buttons on your remote control that I think describe for us and kind of give us a visual hook that we can kind of hang some of these thoughts on. The first one is a pause button. And when I'm talking about a pause button, I'm talking about the ways that we press pause in the craziness of life to experience Jesus. I'm not talking about just pressing pause and taking a day off of work, although that is a great thing, or pressing pause to get some things done around the house so you can kind of catch up. These are all, these can be potentially really good things for you. I remember the first time somebody told me that sometimes the most spiritual thing we can do is take a nap. If that's the case, I intend to be very spiritual this afternoon, okay? I will. But there is a need for these physical pauses, but I'm talking about a pause that really nourishes your soul, where you reconnect with your Creator, with the one who gives you life, with the God, as we were singing, who breathes breath into your dry bones. And so we have these moments where we pause, and this is where we maybe would like to camp out. I'm at least speaking for myself. I kind of wish I could live in a continuous pause, but then there is this other side of life, and it's the play button. And by play, I'm not talking about, hey, let's go play softball. I mean, just where we resume the story of our lives, the real story, not the Hollywood version on the screens, but the behind the scenes, the normal, the day-to-day, which is sometimes filled with good times and sometimes filled with those challenging moments. But the play button is where all of our energies are poured into doing. And it's easily justified doing those things because they're good and they're beneficial. And we say things like, well, the sheep really need me. I've got to be doing this. This field would be empty if it wasn't for me returning to it. So there is a component of this. And sometimes we place our identity in it, and we say, this is the doing that I do because it's just who I am. But as your weary soul has been trying to tell you, you can't always be on the go. You need to pause every now and then. And so we might have a mixture, and it could be more a personality type than where you are on your spiritual journey, but some of us really want to pause, and some of us would love the thought of being able to press play and never getting tired. So what is it that we do? See, I used to really struggle with this transition from pause to play, from worship to work. And when I say I used to really struggle, I mean now I only struggle. I used to really struggle, okay? But it's still pretty hard for me as I try and make this transition. But I've begun to realize that it's not pause or play. There's that combination button that maybe you have on your remote. You know which one I'm talking about? It's pause and play both on the same button. And really, I think this is the life that God has called us to. It is one where we are able to live paused, centered, and remembering as we go out back into the world. We're able to take with us the God that we just met. As we are experiencing that manger moment, we take that manger moment with us internally back out into that field, into that normalcy. This is something that I still really have to work on. I'm going to give you an example of a time. This took place about 15 years ago when it was extremely obvious that I needed to work on the transition from manger moments, worship, and all of that back into the real world. One of my favorite things to do on Sunday afternoons, if I was back 15 years ago when the story took place, I was a youth pastor, and occasionally I would be asked to speak on a Sunday and for the main services in the big church. Did you ever call it big church? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. And I would speak in big church, and my favorite activity after that was to go see a movie. Now, I don't go see movies on Sunday afternoons now because it would just be a $9 nap is really what it would be. But back then, I would really, I don't know, I was exhausted. My 10-year-old daughter and I'm still tired after teaching. If those of you that have done it, you know kind of what I'm talking about. But my 10-year-old daughter said, "Dad, I don't know why you're so tired. All you did was talk." And coming from someone who talks nonstop. So, but it was always a really, really hard transition for me to do this, to go from spiritual responsibilities to what I was wrongly kind of considering non-spiritual responsibilities, which is a clue as to where I drifted off the path. So anyway, I go to a movie, and I don't remember what the movie was. All I remember was that there was someone seated behind me, a few rows behind me, that had a newborn child with them who cried the entire movie. Distracting, to say the least. In fact, it got so heated in the movie at times, there were people that stood up and turned around and started yelling at the guy to take his kid out. I did not. Instead, I sat there and let it fester. And I tuned out the movie, and I started thinking about, this is what I'm going to say to this guy as soon as the movie gets out. I mean, this guy, he is so selfish. You know, he's such a jerk. And those were the nice things I was thinking. And so the movie ends, and people literally are still yelling at this guy. I mean, it was quite a mob scene that was taking place. And as it turned out, he's coming down the stairs as I'm getting to the end of my aisle, and I'm thinking, thank you, Jesus. Here we go. I get to, I'm giving God credit for this sinful thing I'm about to produce. So I just kind of slid in a real smart aleck, sarcastic response, and he did not like that at all. So he fires back, and we're verbally going at it the whole way down the steps and back out towards the lobby. And by the time we get out to the lobby, he's handed off his newborn to someone else. And I mean, we are in each other's faces yelling at each other. I mean, it was one of these conversations where it escalated. This guy steps in between us and very calmly, very graciously says, guys, you need to back off. Just walk out to your cars, go home, it's over. And I could tell the guy was trying to help, but sometimes you don't want somebody to help, and that even makes you mad. And so at first I'm almost kind of angry at him even, and then I take a deep breath and I realize that what he is saying is right, and I have really been stupid in this whole ordeal. And so by now me and this other guy are separated, and that really nice man is right there talking to me, and I go, I'm sorry, you're trying to help. My name's Gary. Thank you for helping. And he said, oh, I know who you are. You're a pastor at my church. On one hand, it's a hilarious story, but it took everything I could do to get out of that lobby without people seeing me crying. And I got out to my car, and I put my head on the steering wheel, and I just lost it. And I was asking myself, well, how can I have this moment that I did in the morning at church? And then it was like Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, it was awful. I didn't do very good at returning, to say the least. In my mind, I kind of had it that once we experience a pause, then that's it. That's spiritually where we're supposed to go and where we're supposed to stay. But God has called us to both and. He's called us to live a life that has one button that's both pause and play, and where you're doing both at the same time. And really the most accurate reflection of a person's spiritual maturity is how he or she acts while in relationship with others, while engaged in the real world. A person's spiritual maturity is not to be gauged by how they are when they're on a stage, or how they are quietly in their prayer closet, or how much Bible knowledge they know, or how consistent they are in attending some type of a spiritual activity. The rubber meets the road in relationships. We invite you on a regular basis to be a part of life groups. Life groups really are a vital part to your spiritual walk. It's not just a key component of our church. It is something that you cannot really thrive and grow and be transformed without in your life. You need relationships to help you, to encourage you, to hold you accountable. And when we are asking you to join with a small band of people to pursue God in the company of friends in these life groups, we're not asking you to create this bubble to where all you do is experience this Christian community in a life group. Really what we are hoping for is that you will experience a transformational encounter when you do gather together, so that when you return to your real life, you're a different person. You're a better person. You're more equipped for whatever it is that's going to get thrown your way. The life group is just kind of that manger moment, but then you got to go back to the same fields and to the same sheep. But we want to go back glorifying and praising God, not screaming and kicking the sheep, as some of us almost literally have done. And this is not just some, hopefully we can do this. This can be done. Even those of us that have really struggled with it, this is a beautiful thing where we can not just experience Jesus in the scriptures, but when we close our Bibles, we can actually continue to live like Jesus would out in the world. That's what it's all about. is taking what happens in just brief environments like this and growing incrementally, step by step, a little bit, and we go back out a little bit more fully present to those people, those sheep that need us. The shepherds are an example of lives being transformed. They returned glorifying and praising God. And when you enter into the grace space of God's presence, it's for the purpose of transformation. It's designed to bring changes to you. And this transformation is what makes the returning a positive, God-glorifying encounter. We could dread it. We can deny it. We can try to avoid it. Or we can go back transformed and better equipped for it. And again, this pausing that we're talking about is not just pausing so that you can, it's not taking a break from the field and the sheep so you can get caught up on chores at home. I'm talking about pulling away from the world for the purpose of attaching your soul to God, recharging, you're plugging back in, and now you're better equipped to go back out because of what has taken place in the nourishment of your soul. So the key to the return is really in the pausing, the life-giving, soul-transforming presence of Jesus. And this is very good news. Hope has entered into the world, and we can experience this hope and carry this hope with us as we go back. So let me give you just a handful of tips for coping with whatever you want to call it, the holiday blues, just anything that you have to return to that is less than ideal. Some things for you to consider. First of all, remember that no event can be great enough to permanently alleviate feelings such as loneliness, sadness, anger, frustration, or fear. Maybe your Christmas holidays were great, and you were able to completely remove yourself from the struggles and battles, and you're kind of thinking, okay, what do I have waiting on me? There is nothing that is so great that it's going to change what you're going back to. If we stopped right there, it would be very depressing. But the good news is, and this is tip number 2, your response to what life throws at you is a choice. Whatever it is that is waiting on you, you have an opportunity to go back into that with a new mind, with a mind that has been renewed. As you have spent some time with God, He has reshaped the way that you think. He has given you a new perspective on life, and you begin to see things from God's point of view. You have the freedom and the power to choose what is wise and healthy and good as you go back to that field and as you deal with those sheep. The third tip is show yourself some grace. Maybe you go back and you scream and kick the sheep. My advice is don't scream and kick yourself. Give yourself some grace, because one of the most transforming things for you is realizing that God is a God of grace. And He wants to see you grow and to recognize, maybe you need to recognize that maybe you're just carrying a frazzled shell of yourself right now. Give yourself some grace. Maybe you need to make note of the soul fatigue that you have and use that as a reason to rethink how you're going to head into the holidays next year. Okay, next year, I'm not going to get to this frazzled state. I'm going to really intentionally pause and connect my soul with my Creator so that I can have a response that's not dangerously exhausted and unhealthy. And then my final tip is continue to look for Jesus after you go back. Those manger moments are powerful, but I want you to realize that Jesus is no less present in that field with those sheep when you go back. We have this opportunity to continue to see God in the midst of an opportunity that maybe is surprising. And it's in those dark times that His light maybe would shine the brightest. As I was in a season of my life where I was asked to go speak at retreats and some camps. I was invited to Daytona Beach to speak at a camp, and it was one of those that I really had a great encounter one year, and then that church asked me to come back the next year, and I'd had this great these really cool encounters on the beach. For a Midwesterner, anytime you get to the beach, it's pretty special. And I was able to have not just some cool moments on the beach, but some cool moments with the creator of the beach, on the beach. And just really, my soul came alive in that. And I remembered, as I was preparing for that second trip down there, I remembered how difficult it was for me when I got back home. There was no beach. There was no beautiful sunrise over the water that I could see. There was nothing... just that spiritual encounter that I had wasn't going to be waiting for me when I got home to all the responsibilities of being a dad and work and everything else. And so it was with that in mind, I get back to this same retreat center right there on the beach. And the year before, I got up to see the sunrise on the beach. But this year, the second time around, in preparation for headed back, I chose to go to the other side of the hotel, opposite the beach. And I journaled, God, I've seen you in the sunrise at the beach. Now I want to see you in the traffic. As grumpy pedestrians walk to work, when I can smell exhaust. You are here. You are Lord of this side of the world. You are the creator of this side of hotels. Father, if I can hear your voice over the persistent clatter of man and see your activity in the rush hours of life, then I can see you always. I want to be awed by your glory in this world, the real world. I want to be captured by your love while seated in front of a parking garage to the same degree that I would be enthralled with your presence on the beach or during a sweet worship service. I'm temporarily hidden from the awe-inspiring glow of your sunrise over the water. Sand is replaced with cold concrete, chilled by the shadow of the hotel. I'm unable to hear the rhythmic rolling of the waves, but God, I know you are here. Not just above distracting noises, but in them. I want you to experience a transformation that allows you to see God when you go back to that field and when you go back to caring for your sheep. Wouldn't it be great if your commitment to transformation really did that for you? It's not going to change the field or the sheep, but it's going to transform you and make you more like Christ, and you will go back more as the shepherd that God has created you to be. And then the final part of Luke 2:20 says, for they all had seen and heard and been told them. They glorified and praised God for all they had seen and heard and been told of them. In other words, there was a pause, that manger moment, and then they resumed. It was this pause-play combination, and I think the key to it was remembering. If I had to sum up what we've been talking about today and give you one word to walk away with, I would say it's remember. If you have had a moment where you knew God was with you, Emmanuel, remember that. Remember that. Cling to that. And when you go back to your field, when you go back to your sheep and all your responsibilities, remember Jesus has been born into this world. Remember that God sees where you are. Remember that he loved you so much that he sent his son. Remember, God has not forgotten what you're going through. Remember Jesus' birth and remember what that means as you return. Remember that salvation is here. Remember that salvation has come. As we turn the corner and get ready for just a time of personal reflection and prayer, I want to ask the band to make their way up. You may be moved in a way that you want to come down front to pray with someone and share with them about some of the struggles that you're having with this thought of returning. Or maybe with a smile on your face, you just want to come down and say, hey, I remember what God has done in my life. Pray that I can remember this, cling to this in the days ahead. Have you had that meaningful manger moment? Maybe you need to come down front and say, I'm looking forward to, for the very first time, having a manger moment. Would you pray with me as I meet Jesus for the very first time? Any of those reasons and more would be a great reason for you to respond, just as God's kind of nudging you to do. So I'm going to ask you to stand to your feet. I'm going to pray for us. And I want you to respond as you see, just that you feel that you need to. Father, help us to remember. Thank you that you are such a gracious God. It is by your grace that we have manger moments. It is by your grace that you forgive us when we confess to the times that we've screamed and kicked. And it is by your grace that we can worship you in the midst of our work, that we can experience a pause and internal celebration of your presence, even as life continues to scroll on. Give us minds to remember. It's in your name I pray. Amen.